Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I want to know who's here with me tonight. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. All right, let's get to the first story. Good evening, Don. My name is Layla. I grew up in a small rural town with mild weather where most roads were just dirt lanes and the houses were modest, often built with reclaimed materials. The fences were made of wooden posts tied together with wire. My childhood memories center around my mother's kitchen and the backyard where my two brothers and I would run around at the end of the day when we weren't busy with chores like peeling vegetables or feeding the chickens. We didn't have much money as I was growing up, but my mother always managed to bring home cheap books from yard sales or thrift shops. She liked to read just about anything: adventure stories, short romances, even volumes filled with recipes and folk remedies. People said her grandmother had been a midwife and a folk healer in another state, though I never got to meet her. My mother's love of books passed on to me, and I ended up reading whatever I could find: children's tales, comic books, promotional pamphlets, anything with words. When I was about 13, my best friend Marcia found an old notebook in her grandfather's basement. She showed up at my door one day, excited, holding this dust-covered item. It had a thick paper cover with dark stains and symbols that made no sense to us. We decided to flip through it together, half curious, half scared. The pages spoke of protection rites, confusing prayers, and references to entities we had never heard of. Even though I felt uneasy, I was fascinated. I copied down a few passages about strong prayers or formulas to ward off negative energies. I wasn't planning to practice them back then. I was just curious. My teenage years were shaped by this blend of curiosity and a practical sense of reality. I helped at home, went to school, read my books, and kept those few notes about magic tucked away. It wasn't something I shared freely because most people around me frowned upon such topics. A few years later, I finished high school in that small town and realized I wanted to try life somewhere else. I got a temporary job at a local grocery store, saved money for about 2 years, and by the time I was around 22, I decided to move to a city known for its mystical atmosphere. I won't go into details about the place itself. Anyone who lives there already knows its reputation. Healers, people offering special prayers, some promising to break curses of envy. I arrived with my suitcase, some spare cash, and my books, including my old notebook of notes. I soon found work at a restaurant, starting as a kitchen assistant. The pay was tight, but it allowed me to rent a room in a modest boarding house. I liked the work environment. My co-workers were friendly, and though the daily routine was demanding, it was honest work. After a few months, I was able to rent a small house of my own, with a backyard and 2 windows facing the street. It felt like a dream to have my own space, no matter how simple. The street I moved to was quiet. The neighbors didn't talk much, just exchanged quick greetings in passing. In the house next door lived an elderly man named Anthony, known for sitting outside each afternoon in a wooden chair to drink tea. He was tall and lean, with neatly trimmed hair, and he had a calm manner that reminded me of older uncles from my hometown, always ready for a good chat. At first, we only exchanged "good afternoon" and nothing more. After a few weeks, when he saw me coming home from work with a heavy bag of groceries, he offered to help. "Let me carry that for you," he said. "No, that's not necessary. I can manage, thank you." "Don't worry, young lady, I've got plenty of time out here." I accepted, and he picked up the groceries with ease. We chatted for a few minutes about the weather and the plants in our yards. He mentioned that he had worked in several trades and knew well the reputation of this city, where many people seek spiritual help. That was the first of many friendly conversations to come. In the following months, every time I passed by his house, he would smile and ask something about my routine at the restaurant. He seemed genuinely interested in helping. Sometimes I'd arrive home late because the place got busy on Friday and Saturday nights. Anthony would see me pass by and warn me to be careful, as some streets were deserted at that hour. I thanked him and went into my house, glad to have a polite neighbor. One night I came home exhausted from the restaurant. It was already past 10. Anthony called me over to his gate. He said he had made some soup, had plenty left over, and asked if I wanted a bowl. My stomach growled right away because I hadn't had time for dinner. I went to his kitchen, which was surprisingly organized, filled with the aroma of spices and leaves I couldn't immediately identify. We chatted while I ate. He explained that he'd lived in many places and had found this city to be one where he could settle without being bothered. When I finished the soup, Anthony's tone changed. He said I seemed to have a different kind of energy, something that made me stand out. I didn't fully understand, but he insisted I should consider some kind of protective practice. He also said he could teach me certain techniques if I wanted to advance professionally or defend myself from anything negative. At first, I thought it was just talk. I thanked him, but told him I didn't need help. From that moment on, I noticed he began watching me in an almost fixed manner, barely blinking, as if he were studying my every move. One weekend he saw me arrive tired with grocery bags, but he didn't offer to help. Instead, he just stared in silence. I felt uneasy. I couldn't respond with more than a quick nod. I went inside my house and shut the door. In the following nights, whenever I came home from work, he'd be standing in his yard or sitting in that chair, no greeting, just a penetrating gaze. There was something different on his face, resentment or annoyance perhaps. A few days later, I started hearing noises against the wall separating our houses, creaks and intermittent knocks. Initially, I assumed it was just a loose door or the wind shaking something, but the sounds continued, especially in the middle of the night. I asked out loud if everything was okay, but got no response. My daily life became tense. I'd leave early for work with my mind spinning. The restaurant job drained my energy, prepping ingredients, serving, cleaning, and I returned home worn out, too tired to confront my neighbor. Then, on a Sunday night, I got home and saw Anthony leaning on the fence between our backyards. He didn't say anything, just watched me walk in. I closed the door and sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book. Minutes later, I heard scraping noises against the wall as if someone was shoving furniture. Then silence. I tried to sleep but spent hours staring at the ceiling. The next night, the same thing. I started locking every door and window, but I still heard noises in the middle of the night, followed by a muffled laugh that left me on edge. I remembered that years ago, I had copied some protection rites into my notebook, more out of curiosity than belief. I decided to look them up. I found a passage about lighting a white candle, using a handful of salt and repeating certain prayers. I tried it, making a little circle of salt in my living room. I turned off the lights and recited the words quietly. Nothing happened right away, but the rest of that night was noise-free. I dared to hope that maybe I had solved the problem. However, the following week, I started having nightmares again and felt a constant tension. I began to suspect someone was in my backyard because almost every day I found my potted plants knocked over or tracks of dirt near my back door. I figured it might be an animal, but there were no holes or droppings to indicate that. Once, I even saw a human-like shadow on the other side of the fence. I couldn't tell for sure if it was him, but the stance looked familiar. I was too afraid to go out and check. By then, my change in behavior was obvious at the restaurant. I messed up orders, and my manager commented that I seemed distracted. I confided in a co-worker, Sylvia, that my neighbor was acting creepy, but I didn't go into detail. She just asked if I had considered moving. I had no money to relocate again, which made me feel even more vulnerable. I thought about calling the police, but I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously without concrete evidence, and I wasn't sure how to explain what felt like a mix of the supernatural and trespassing. On a Tuesday night around midnight, I heard loud knocks on my window. I jumped up in alarm and went to check. No one was there. My heart was pounding. I decided to do a quick search around the backyard. I opened the door carefully and looked around with my phone's flashlight, only to come face to face with Anthony, crouched by the plants. He stared at me like I was the intruder. My legs almost gave out beneath me. Then, in one swift motion that seemed far too quick for his age, he vaulted over the fence. For a moment I felt something about that leap was unnatural for such a thin, elderly man. I slammed the door shut and slid the bolt. I tried to sleep, but the night was horrible. By the next day I wasn't sure if I should report him for trespassing, since he hadn't directly harmed me and I had no proof. The day after that I found dirt scattered in my hallway again. My insomnia worsened. When I did doze off, I'd dream of a male figure standing by my bed watching me. I woke up confused, unsure what was real and what was just a nightmare. My thoughts kept returning to those nightly noises and Anthony's earlier insistence about my energy. I decided to visit a local spiritual healer named Felicia, who worked out of a simple house at the end of the main street. I told her in vague terms that I felt like I was under some negative influence. She welcomed me in and said that sometimes people who work with unknown practices can create an unwanted connection. She performed a cleansing, praying quietly while using leaves and holy water. She said I did carry a heavy vibration, but warned that might not be enough to solve everything. I bought a small charm from her to hang on my front door. I considered returning to tell her about the trespassing, but I worried about the cost of more sessions and felt embarrassed by the whole situation. That evening when I got home, Anthony was seated in his chair again. He lifted his head and followed me with his eyes, but didn't speak. I went inside, turned on all the lights, placed the charm on the doorknob and tried to eat something. In the middle of the night, I woke up to banging on my back door. I had pushed a bookshelf against it, so whoever it was couldn't open it. The banging went on for a few seconds, then stopped. I spent the rest of the night wide awake. On the weekend, I returned from work around 11 at night to find my front gate unlocked and muddy footprints by my door. I cleaned up, both angry and frightened. Then I remembered a ritual I'd noted years ago, something about sending bad intentions back. The idea was to reverse any attack back to its source. I'd always thought it was extreme, but I felt desperate. I gathered the materials: candles, salt, some dried herbs Felicia had given me. I waited until midnight, closed the curtains, turned off all the lights, and sat in my living room with everything ready. I prayed softly, asking only to be left in peace. Mentally, I tied each ingredient to the negative force I felt coming from my neighbor. It was a strange experience, a mixture of faith and fear. I felt a knot in my stomach, worried I was doing something dangerous. Outside, I couldn't hear any noise at all. When I finished, The candles were still burning, and I remained still until the flames died out. Then, utterly drained, I fell asleep on the couch. Over the next few nights, I noticed Anthony had disappeared from his yard. I grew curious to see if he was still around. A neighbor mentioned he had been taken to the hospital. Some people said his health had been fragile, and he'd been seeing doctors off and on. It might have taken a sudden turn for the worse. I felt a confusing blend of relief and pity. I wasn't sure if the ritual had anything to do with his condition, or if it was just a coincidence. Still, I slept better for a few days. But things soon took a darker turn. About a week later, word went around the street that the elderly man had passed away in the hospital. People also said they found odd items in his house: notebooks with strange symbols, jars with old liquids, and photos of people no one recognized. I stayed out of it, listening quietly while recalling every time he stopped me to talk about my energy or stood in my yard at night. It took me a while to come to terms with it all. I felt guilty, fearing I might have hastened his health issues by some means. At least, that's what kept crossing my mind. On the other hand, I couldn't see another way out of that silent harassment which had robbed me of sleep and threatened my sanity. Over time, I gradually returned to calmer days and nights. I tended to my backyard, replaced the lock on the gate, and fixed the loose window latches. I still work at the restaurant. My co-workers noticed I seemed more at ease, though still rather quiet. I didn't share the details, only saying that my neighbor had had some problems. Occasionally, I still remember those nighttime sounds and footprints. Rumors circulated that before he passed, he'd told the hospital staff someone wouldn't leave him in peace. I never learned any more. It seemed everyone preferred to let the matter rest. Months passed and his house was chained shut. Some people went inside to clear out the furniture and either sell or donate it. I'm not sure which. Sometimes a stray dog crosses the street and stops to bark in front of the empty gate. But there's no chair on the porch anymore, no sign of tea. I still keep my old notebook of magical notes in the back of a closet. I never plan to use it for anything similar again, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It's a reminder that sometimes, when no one else can help us, we turn to solutions we never imagined. The restaurant is still going strong. I'm saving up to maybe move somewhere bigger in the future. I still think about what happened and can't be certain if it was all chance or if there really was some unknown power at play. Either way, my life is back to normal. People say I'm more serious now, but I feel safer. At night, when I lie down, I don't hear any more noises outside. And if a new neighbor ever moves in next door, I only hope they bring the kind of simple, respectful coexistence everyone deserves. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. My name is Marcus. I was born and raised in a small rural community where my family owned an orchard and a farm supply store. Over time, we grew our business but never felt the need to leave. My father, Raymond, always believed that a family's roots were as important as the very land it cultivated. My mother, Martha, used to say that what mattered most was keeping our hearts light, no matter where we were. She passed away about 2 years ago, after battling a long illness. That left a void my father was never truly able to fill. In the first year after she died, My father still tried to maintain his usual routines. He took care of the orchard early in the morning, as he always had, and then went to the farm supply store. It was as though he clung to her memory through his work. But over time, he lost motivation. He would spend hours in the store's office, with the door closed, staring at papers without actually reading anything. I did my best to manage the administrative part. I had decided to take an online business administration course, fitting it around harvesting fruit for our weekly sales. This way, I tried to reduce his workload and also distract myself from the grief that lingered in the house. When that year's harvest began, I had to hire new people for the store. Interviewing applicants was never my strong suit, but I realized I had no choice. My father had no energy left for managing employees or organizing sales. It was during this period that Tanya appeared. She came on a regular day, almost late in the afternoon. She said she had accounting experience and knew how to handle inventory. She spoke with impressive conviction, pointing out details only a sharp observer would notice. I found her way of looking around curious, as though she already knew the place better than I did. I remember feeling a tiny jolt of apprehension, but I didn't give it much weight at the time. We needed someone who understood finance, and she seemed to fit the bill. Look, I'm happy to work somewhere like this, close to nature. My last job was in a big city firm, but I couldn't handle the constant rush. My father just observed, not saying much. I was honest and explained that the job went beyond finances, since we also needed someone to receive merchandise, guide delivery drivers, and organize the flow of inventory. Tanya smiled and said she was fine with all of that. Deep down, I saw a certain gleam in her eyes, like she was already planning more than I could imagine. We ended up hiring Tanya. At first, her performance was flawless. She arranged cost spreadsheets, negotiated better terms with some suppliers, and even renewed some old records for the store. In a way, I felt thankful to have her help. But I noticed my father became extremely close to her. Several times when I arrived at the store, I found them talking in a more intimate way than the situation called for. Tanya spoke softly, gesturing slowly, and my father listened as if he were hypnotized. As the months passed, I realized my father started accepting everything she suggested without even consulting me. At one point, I noticed she had gone through the orchard's property papers. There were documents for transfers and blank powers of attorney. When I asked my father, he just shrugged and said it was a way to streamline future deals. That worried me because I had never heard any talk about selling any part of the orchard. Dad, why exactly do we need a power of attorney? He took a while to answer, as if he was searching for a justification. In the end, he said he wasn't sure, but Tanya mentioned it might be useful if we wanted to expand the store. I felt something was off. Since when did we plan any expansion without sitting down to discuss it as a family? Meanwhile, my father began feeling unwell more often. He complained about body aches and persistent fatigue, and sometimes he'd fall asleep on the office couch out of nowhere. Even though he had always been healthy, he started losing weight for no apparent reason. Tanya showed up at the house every day with soups and teas, claiming they were traditional recipes to make him stronger. Whenever I tried convincing him to see a doctor, she would appear with a smile, saying that doctors only prescribed chemical-laden medications that wouldn't really help. Don't you trust me, Marcus? It's not a matter of trust. I just think he needs a professional diagnosis. I swear it's nothing serious. You'll see, he'll get better. I felt helpless because my father himself refused to go to the hospital. He said it was just some passing ache, an emotional discomfort caused by missing my mother. Still, he became increasingly distant. A few more weeks passed with this pattern of complaints. One afternoon, I found a peculiar object in a corner of our yard. It was a small package made of dried leaves, tied with a brown cord. Inside were what looked like tiny pieces of fabric and ashes, plus some hair that definitely wasn't my father's. I was alarmed. I showed him, but he just shrugged, saying he had no idea what it could be. A few days later, I discovered that Tanya had taken several important papers from the office. When I asked about it, she said she was just speeding up some paperwork, but gave no details. My father, without any reaction, simply stated that he trusted her. It was infuriating, yet I didn't know how to act without causing an even bigger conflict. Things really started unraveling when he began having disturbing dreams. I could hear him in the middle of the night, uttering incomprehensible murmurs. In the morning, he could barely remember anything. He only knew he'd dreamt of a woman who was asking him for something, like she wanted him to yield to a request he couldn't fully understand. He began waking up with mild fevers, trembling, but still refused to go to the hospital. Tanya was always nearby, saying these symptoms were part of a purification process and that everything would improve soon. During this period, I decided to seek out Ms. Eva, a folk healer known in our region. She lived just a few miles away. We talked about my father's behavior, about Tanya, and about the strange things I had found. Ms. Eva listened carefully, stirring a broth of herbs on her wood stove. After a bit of thought, she said she had dealt with similar cases of manipulation involving items placed in someone's home or food to weaken them and facilitate control. She advised me to use some rue sprigs and a piece of cloth soaked in an herbal mixture. She told me to hide it behind my father's headboard without him noticing. She also advised me not to discuss the subject openly because if Tanya was involved in something more serious, confronting her without proof could be dangerous. I followed Ms. Eva's instructions. That night I attached the cloth to the bed frame as quietly as I could. In the morning I noticed my father had a different kind of coughing fit, but then he got better. Tanya, however, seemed uneasy in the kitchen. She was quieter than usual. Later that same day, she insisted on making some strange juice for my father and urged me to try it as well. I politely declined. That was enough for her to look at me in a way I can't quite describe. It wasn't an explicit threat, but I had a strong feeling she'd noticed something. Gradually, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. Tanya practically moved in, sleeping in our guest room. Questioning her presence made little sense by then because my father trusted her blindly. Meanwhile, his health kept declining. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. At other times, he felt a bit better for a day or two and managed to go to the store's office to sign papers, though he remained very tired. It was as if there were brief windows of improvement before he slipped back into a weakened state. I tried to keep things running at the store because I couldn't abandon our customers. Whenever I got home, I found Tanya in the living room or the kitchen, acting like she owned the place. She spent hours in my father's private office with documents and spreadsheets that used to be my responsibility. When I questioned her, she gave vague answers, saying she was acting on his instructions. You know your father can't handle these matters now. It's better if someone he trusts takes care of it, right? One Sunday morning, I got an urgent phone call from Robert, a lawyer and old friend of the family. He warned me about suspicious activity regarding land and assets in my father's name. It looked like someone was taking steps to raise the property's value and then sell part of the orchard. I couldn't understand how that was possible without my signature or my father's. "Have you seen my father there, Robert?" "Yeah, I did, but he only showed up to sign whatever the woman indicated. He barely spoke. I got suspicious and decided to call you." I felt outraged. Robert also mentioned noticing a signature that didn't look like my father's on a power of attorney document. He suspected Tanya had help from someone to get it notarized with a forged signature. That frightened me even more. That same day, I decided I would demand an explanation. Confronting Tanya in front of my father would only spark an argument, so I waited until she was alone in the office. I walked in and saw her going through a brown envelope full of official documents. "Where did you get that?" She stepped back and placed the envelope on the desk. "Your father authorized me to handle these issues. Don't look at me like I'm an intruder." "You are an intruder, Tanya. It makes no sense to be messing with our family deeds. What do you want?" "You're wasting time. If we don't reorganize things, taxes and fees will eat away at the orchard. I'm only trying to help." We almost argued, but Tanya quickly changed her tone, claiming everything was under control. She said my father was getting older and needed someone to manage the finances, especially after my mother's death. When I left the office, I felt anger and helplessness because nothing I said seemed to change the situation. The following week, my father had a severe episode and ended up in the emergency room of the nearest town. It took almost 10 days to convince him to go, as he kept avoiding it. Tanya wanted to ride with him in the car, but I insisted on going alone, saying we didn't need so many people at the hospital. She stayed silent and wouldn't meet my gaze. During the checkup, his tests revealed no specific problem to explain such weakness. The doctor said it could be psychological stress, combined with a lack of vitamins. My father refused to be hospitalized, so we went back home. As soon as we parked, Tanya appeared with a cup of some dark liquid, insisting it would fix everything. "Enough of this, Tanya. He just left the hospital. He needs to take what the doctor prescribed." Pharmacy meds always end up hurting other organs, Marcus. Trust natural methods a bit more. My father, still exhausted, took a sip of the liquid while giving me a confused look, as if he couldn't understand why I was so upset. Later, he fell asleep in such a deep slumber that it scared me. If the dose she was giving him was too strong, it could cause serious harm, but I had no concrete evidence, so I kept searching for a way to act. I met with Ms. Eva again. I brought along the leftover liquid Tanya had made, stored in a small bottle. Ms. Eva smelled and examined it, but she couldn't identify it precisely. She said the bitter taste might indicate an herb that induces drowsiness. She advised me to stay protected and, above all, to seek legal help, because something bigger seemed to be at play. I realized Tanya's power wasn't limited to possible witchcraft. She also appeared skilled at fraud and manipulating documents. I couldn't tell if she belonged to some group or specific cult, but the meticulous way she operated gave me that impression. Even without witnessing impossibilities, the whole atmosphere at home felt unnervingly heavy. Sometimes I experienced a tightness in my chest for no obvious reason. One day I got home from the store earlier than usual and saw Tanya in the backyard, walking around as if she was checking the ground. It looked like she was burying small objects in specific spots. When she noticed me, she quickly hid whatever was in her hands and went inside. I was left unsure how to react. "What were you doing out there?" She smiled. "Just gathering some branches for tea, nothing more." I didn't push it, but I stayed alert. The next night I took a flashlight and examined the backyard. I searched carefully until I found a small glass jar partially buried next to a clump of tall grass. Inside there was a rolled-up piece of paper with reddish stains and something that looked like fine sand. I placed it all in a bag and locked it in my trunk. I thought about taking it to Ms. Ava, but decided not to bother her so late. The next morning, my father woke up with a sharp stomach pain. I stayed by his side, hoping it would subside, but it didn't improve. Tanya said she would prepare a special tea. That's when I mustered the courage to say that from now on, any medication would come from a doctor or Ms. Eva, but not from her. She stared at me in silence and left the room. With Robert's help, my father and I managed to block any sale of the orchard, at least for the time being. He discovered forgeries in progress and filed a complaint at the right notary office. I felt confident it would stop Tanya from pursuing her goals, but she didn't back down. Instead, she ignored me and increased her hold on my father. She claimed I wanted to take all decisions into my own hands and that I didn't respect his wishes, and that if my mother were still alive, she would approve Tanya's ideas. It was a low blow. After a lot of resistance, I convinced my father to spend a few days at my cousin's house so he could rest and get away from Tanya. His situation was worsening, and the doctor advised him to avoid stress. Surprisingly, Tanya agreed without a fight, saying she also needed time to sort things out. We left that afternoon. Leaving her alone in our house was risky from a security standpoint, but I was more concerned with safeguarding my father from a serious relapse. Once at my cousin's place, my father slept for more than 12 hours straight, no longer following Tanya's routine of potions and teas. I noticed he was more alert the next day, though still confused. Meanwhile, Tanya remained at our house, supposedly taking care of everything. This decision would later haunt me, as leaving her there was hardly wise when it came to important documents. Robert advised me to file a request forcing her to leave due to breach of trust. The legal process would take time, but it was a start. One afternoon, when we returned to pick up some clothes and paperwork, I found Tanya in the kitchen trying to open a locked drawer where my father kept some deeds. As soon as she saw me, she tried to cover it up and left the room. I asked to talk. "We're closing in on you, you know that, right?" "I have no idea what you're talking about. We've already blocked any sale of our land, the rest is just a matter of time." "I think you're counting your chickens too soon. Your father still trusts me, and I'm not doing anything illegal." I took a deep breath and resisted the urge to throw her out. I left the house, called Robert, and asked him to expedite the legal papers. The next day, he confirmed that the court injunction would be issued soon. I immediately sought help from local law enforcement to ensure that once the injunction came through, she'd be removed from our property without resistance. In the meantime, the house filled with signs that Tanya wasn't going to back off easily. One evening, a neighbor saw someone who looked like Tanya pouring liquid over our front gate. By morning, the plants around it were withered, as if they'd been burned by a chemical. Nobody could explain that. Another time, our security alarm went off in the middle of the night with no sign of intrusion. The system had been reconfigured, as if someone had tampered with it to trigger false alerts. Finally, the injunction was granted the following week. I managed to have 2 officers accompany Robert and me to our house. When we arrived, Tanya was sitting on the porch, staring into space. One of the officers read the document and she calmly stood up, saying she would gather her things. She didn't scream or protest, but gave me a look that stirred a deep discomfort. She mumbled something too low for me to catch and walked toward a waiting car. Only then did I realize I'd been holding my breath. In the days that followed, I dove into a thorough cleaning of the house and the store. I found small bundles of herbs and strange-looking objects under beds, behind doors, even inside potted plants. I gathered everything in plastic bags. I showed them to my father, who was beginning to regain his clarity. He didn't remember ever allowing any of that. He felt embarrassed and guilty for having put so much faith in Tanya. Robert managed to cancel all suspicious transactions. We still had a long road of paperwork ahead, but at least the worst had been avoided. Emotionally, though, the damage was done. Around the house, some walls needed repainting because of dark stains left behind where she'd placed her items. In the orchard, a few trees looked strangely withered. One day, while cleaning, I found a dead bird near one of the half-buried jars. Apparently, it had swallowed part of the contents, which reinforced my belief that something sinister was going on. I decided to ask Ms. Ava to perform a spiritual cleansing. She came and blessed every corner. There was no dramatic supernatural event, but we felt a clear sense of relief as we finished. My father recovered gradually. He spent more time sitting on the porch, soaking up the sun. He helped me at the store again, little by little, avoiding any heavy lifting. It was obvious he was upset with himself, but I never blamed him. Losing my mother had left him vulnerable. Anyone arriving with an air of competence and concern would have been welcomed. Even without solid proof of the paranormal, I couldn't ignore the string of coincidences and strange incidents that came with Tanya's arrival. I couldn't prove she belonged to some dark group, but her patterns and actions left marks that defy simple logic. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I remember the looks Tanya gave me. I don't know if she was genuinely involved in sinister rituals, or if it was all just a carefully orchestrated performance to deceive us. Either way, life went on, and my father and I became closer than ever. The store is still running, and the orchard is more productive than ever. On clear nights, I still feel a twinge of tension when the wind rustles the trees, but maybe it's just a reminder of what we went through. I don't see it as something supernatural, just the memory of a time when everything nearly fell apart. Yet we pulled through. If I learned anything, it's that the best protection is never to ignore small warning signs, and above all, to value those who have always been by our side. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. Good evening, Dom. My name is Matthew. I'm a little over 30 years old and work as an analyst at a mid-sized company. I've always lived a low-key life. I live with my parents, I use weekends to rest, and I rarely accept invitations to go out during the week. Until a few months ago, I never would have imagined that something so strange could happen to me. I'm going to share everything I experienced here, hoping it might serve as a warning or at least help relieve some of the weight I carry in my mind. When I was offered a chance to join a big project at the company, my routine became more demanding. I arrived early, left late, and hardly had any time for myself. Even so, I felt somewhat excited about the challenge. A colleague named Sergio, who worked in the same department, suggested we go to a coffee shop not too far from the office to talk about ideas that could boost our goals. It wasn't exactly a bar, but it served alcoholic beverages and supposedly had a pleasant atmosphere to relax after a busy day. I arrived there on a Wednesday late afternoon, tired but willing to have a tea or something that would help me clear my head. I messaged Sergio, letting him know I had already arrived. After a few minutes, he replied that something had come up and he couldn't make it. My first impulse was to go back home, but something made me stay. Maybe I just wanted to enjoy that free hour before facing the heavy traffic. So I ordered a drink and watched the people chatting at the surrounding tables. At a certain point, I noticed a woman sitting alone at the counter. She seemed calm, but her face caught my attention because, unlike most people, she didn't have any phone nearby. She was just observing the place as though waiting for someone. I glanced at her briefly and then focused on my glass again. Moments later, I realized she was staring at me. It was an odd feeling, not disapproving or exaggerated, more like she was silently inviting me to come closer. I'm not usually the type to strike up conversations with strangers, but that day, I felt compelled to speak to her. I stood up, trying not to look uncertain, and walked over to the counter. I greeted her with a small smile. "Hi, how's it going?" I asked somewhat awkwardly. She smiled back, said her name was Ivana, and asked if I was a regular at that coffee shop. I answered that I wasn't, that I happened to be there because a friend had just cancelled on me. She made a comment about how unpredictable things can be, which I found a bit cryptic, but it fit her calm demeanor. I ended up ordering another drink and sitting next to her. The conversation was light. We talked about music preferences, how that area tended to be busier on weekends, and how people barely had time to breathe in the midst of their rush. One small detail bothered me, though. Even without me giving too much information, Ivana seemed to know that I liked quieter places. She made a remark that surprised me. "You seem like the type who prefers peace and quiet, don't you?" I figured it was just a guess. I replied something generic, confirming that I'm not a fan of crowds. Before I knew it, it was already past 9 at night. I had to wake up early the next day. I said goodbye, but right as I went to say farewell, Ivana placed her hand on mine. "We're going to run into each other again." I agreed with a slightly awkward laugh, not sure if that meant we were making some kind of promise. I left feeling it was all a bit odd, but also intriguing. I'm not used to letting strangers into my life so easily. It felt strange to give in like that. The next day, I kept thinking about our conversation. I got back to work, immersed in my tasks. Sergio asked if the coffee shop visit had been productive, and I joked about how he'd left me alone there. He laughed and said, "So I hope you use the time to meet new people." I didn't mention Ivana then because I didn't think it mattered. Days went by and I didn't return to the coffee shop. I had no way to contact Ivana. After all, I hadn't gotten her phone number or social media. About 10 days later, I had almost forgotten about her when, one morning, the receptionist called my desk, saying a woman was there to see me. I went downstairs thinking it must be a client or someone related to another project. When I reached the lobby, there stood Ivana. I froze for a few seconds, unsure how to react. "Hi, Matthew, I thought it would be nice to see you again." I asked a bit awkwardly how she knew where I worked. She said I'd mentioned I was an analyst and that she searched for the company name on her own. I didn't recall giving that many details, but at that moment I didn't want to dig deeper into it. To escape the tension, I suggested we go to a bakery a few blocks away so we wouldn't be in the lobby attracting everyone's attention. We walked there, and during our conversation, she made comments about me that indicated she knew things I didn't remember telling her. For example, She mentioned my taste for suspense novels and my habit of waking up early even on weekends. I directly asked how she knew so much. She only smiled softly. Sometimes you speak without realizing it. That made me uncomfortable, though I tried not to show it. After we finished our coffee, she invited me to visit her place on a Saturday afternoon. In that moment, I thought it could be interesting and said yes. But once I returned to work, I started questioning whether I was giving in too quickly to someone I barely knew. I tried convincing myself I was just open to something new, since my routine was so monotonous. On the agreed Saturday, Ivana showed up in front of my apartment building at the arranged time, around 2 in the afternoon. I was surprised by her punctuality, as most people tend to be late. She looked serious but calm. We drove to the place she lived, and I noticed the neighborhood was older, with one-story houses and older two-story homes, without the hustle of central areas. When we arrived, I saw that the front of her house was discreet, with an iron gate and a few potted plants. Inside, Ivana's house was clean but had a peculiar vibe. There was little furniture and almost none of the usual decorations. I saw bookshelves full of books and some ornaments I couldn't recognize. She offered me juice and we talked about trivial things for a while. At some point, I felt an undefined discomfort. Maybe it was the lack of natural light, or maybe the way she looked at me. We spent a few hours there. Although nothing explicitly strange happened, I left feeling mentally drained. I assumed it was just the week's workload adding to the closed-up feel of that place. I drove home and tried not to dwell on it. After that, Ivana began to have a constant presence in my routine. She would send messages at random times, show up near my workplace unannounced, and if I happened to mention any plan of mine, she would likely appear in the middle of it. One day I came home after 9 at night and found her standing at the entrance to my building, saying she'd just stopped by to say hi. I asked how she knew my address, and Ivana claimed I had once mentioned living there since childhood. Again, she insisted I had given her all the details myself. All these little coincidences started to bother me. It wasn't a blatant stalking, but more like a constant presence that went beyond what I considered normal for any relationship. I told my mum about it, and she found the story odd and advised me to be careful. She and my dad had noticed I seemed distracted and wasn't sleeping well. In the following weeks, I noticed more strange signs. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up from unsettling dreams involving Ivana, although I couldn't recall details. I also felt my energy draining. I was more sluggish at work, lacking motivation for anything. Even so, I had no concrete proof that Ivana was doing anything wrong. That's when she invited me again to her place on a Friday night. I agreed, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. When I got there, the house felt darker than before. There were fewer lights on, a scent of burning herbs and a stifling atmosphere. She offered me tea and we started discussing topics far from everyday life. Ivana asked about my life goals, my fears, childhood memories. I answered without thinking too much. The conversation flowed, but I felt increasingly tired. When I realized it, it was nearly midnight. My vision was blurry, my body heavy. She suggested I spend the night instead of driving home. For some reason, I accepted without questioning. I ended up falling asleep on her living room sofa. The next day, I woke up feeling groggy, and Ivana called me into the kitchen for coffee. I found it strange that, even though it was Saturday, I felt no relief in having time to rest. It was as if I'd been up all night. From then on, our meetings became more and more frequent. I tried declining some invitations, but Ivana would appear unexpectedly and persuade me. Gradually, my mom realized I was growing exhausted and distant, yet she didn't know how to help. One weekend, I decided to disappear for a bit to clear my head. I went to visit my cousin Leonard, who lived in another area. I told him I felt pressured by someone overly persistent, though I didn't get into details. Leonard took me out to eat and showed me some interesting local spots. I spent 3 days there. When I came back on Monday, I felt slightly better. But on my second night back, Ivana showed up in my building's lobby asking for me at the front desk. Later, I found out she told the doorman she was a childhood friend and that we needed to talk urgently. I went down to speak with her, irritated and short-tempered. "We need to talk, Matthew." I tried to stay calm and told her I wasn't comfortable with how things were going. She gave me a strange look, then smiled. "You're tired, we'll talk better tomorrow." She turned around and left. I was confused by her reaction. I wanted her to understand, but I couldn't handle that sense of being constantly watched. And despite everything, it wasn't so easy to break things off. She always showed up again. In the following days, I started having nightmares that jolted me awake with my heart pounding. I'd see Ivana in unfamiliar settings, speaking words I couldn't grasp. I woke up multiple times a night and then struggled to get back to sleep. One night when I opened my eyes, I thought I saw a shadow in the corner of my room, but when I tried to focus, there was nothing there. I decided to ignore it, blaming stress. My mom took me to a doctor to see if I was anemic or anything of the sort. The tests showed no physical issues, and the doctor suggested it could be mental exhaustion. Even with attempts at meditation and breathing exercises, my head felt heavy, as if something was draining me. Everything got worse when I began finding little notes left at my door with no signature. They said things like, "I'm thinking of you," or "We need to talk." One time I found one under my car's windshield wiper. I wondered if Ivana was roaming around my building, following me everywhere, but if I tried to ask her about it, she would brush it off. My family really got scared one night when they heard me wake up screaming, saying I felt someone touching me. My dad, who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, tried to calm me down, saying it was just a nightmare. My mom, however, looked very worried and suggested I seek help. She knew a woman named Ms. Sonia, a spiritual healer who helped people through prayers and blessings. I'd never given much thought to this kind of thing, but in my condition I was willing to try anything. I went to Ms. Sonia's house on a Sunday morning. The place was simple, with a small yard and a few chickens roaming around. She greeted me with a gentle smile. I explained without naming names that I suspected a woman was exerting some unusual influence over me. She listened quietly, only interrupting to ask specific questions about how I felt. In the end, she asked me to sit on a chair and began praying softly, moving a small sprig of leaves around my face and my back. When she finished, Miss Sonia said something that left me uneasy. "There's a very strong link attached to you. Someone is pulling you toward a harmful path." She advised me to say certain prayers at night, wear a protective object she gave me, a rough-looking amulet made of stone and cord, and return the following week to reinforce the blessing. I paid her fee and left, my stomach in knots because I didn't know if this would bring any real relief. That same Sunday, I got home and locked myself in my room, trying to relax. My mom knocked to check on me. I told her Ms. Sonia felt a heavy presence around me. My mom hugged me and said it would all be okay. I admit I cried a little, letting out some of the tension, but that night I had another nightmare, even more frightening. I dreamed I was in Ivana's house, but it seemed bigger, with empty hallways and heavy shadows. I called her name but only heard a distant voice. I woke up sweating around 3 in the morning. I barely slept again until dawn. The next day I tried to go about my life as usual. I went to work, focused on my tasks, and tried not to think about Ivana. A friend invited me to the movies, and I accepted, wanting the distraction. But in the afternoon I got a call at the office. The receptionist said someone named Ivana was insisting on seeing me. I asked her to say I was in a meeting. When I went downstairs to leave, there was Ivana on the street, arms folded. "Why aren't you answering me?" She looked at me sternly, and I asked her to stay calm, explaining that our relationship was suffocating. She kept a serious face and said, "If you want to keep your distance, fine, but don't think that solves anything." It sounded almost like a threat. I felt shaken, not sure how to respond. She walked away with her head high. While I was so nervous, I ended up canceling my movie plans at the last minute. That night, I placed Ms. Sonia's amulet under my pillow and prayed for relief from this unease. I can't say I slept well, but at least I didn't have a nightmare. The following day, I tried to keep busy. When I got home, I found an envelope in front of my apartment door. Inside was a cloth wrapping some dried leaves tied with a dark-colored thread, emitting a strange, unpleasant smell. I felt a chill. It had to be from Ivana. I immediately threw it away, but the discomfort lingered. My mom urged me to call Ms. Sonia again. I phoned her and explained about the object I had found. She advised me to bring anything suspicious to her so she could burn it. I said I had already tossed it. She told me that if something like that reappeared, I should keep it and take it to her to examine. She also instructed me to cleanse my apartment with a little salted water in every room, then light a candle on a small dish and pray. I followed her instructions, feeling somewhat foolish because I'm not really a ritual person. But desperation had set in. For the next few days, Ivana didn't show up. No messages, no surprise visits. I had the impression things were finally calming down. I started to recover my spirit a bit. I laughed and chatted with my mom about everyday topics, even joked around with my dad, who seemed relieved to see me more at ease. That lull didn't last long. Almost 2 weeks later, I came home from work and found a small box on my doorstep. I opened it carefully and discovered a stone necklace I didn't recognize, wrapped in a piece of paper with bold handwriting that read, "Keep this with you." There was no name on it, but I had no doubt who'd sent it. I put everything in my car to take to Ms. Sonia. On the way, I felt a deep unease, as if I were carrying a problem that didn't belong to me. Ms. Sonia examined the necklace and said it definitely wasn't an innocent gift. It looked like an attachment the person was trying to reinforce with me. She placed it in a container with a strong-smelling liquid that seemed like alcohol and then lit something resembling incense. She asked me to stand up and prayed again, moving her hands around my body without touching. She told me never to accept anything else from Ivana. Leaving her place, I felt both exhausted and slightly more confident. I talked to my parents, and we changed the lock on our apartment. I also blocked Ivana's number. For almost a week, nothing happened. It was a period of such calm that I started to believe life was returning to normal. But one Sunday morning, when my parents were out running errands and I was home alone, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole and recognized Ivana, even though I could only see part of her face. My heart pounded. I didn't answer. I stayed still, trying not to make any noise. She rang a few more times. After a few minutes, she left. I thought it was over, but then the doorbell buzzed again. I waited longer. When I looked again, there was no one there. I cautiously opened the door and saw a note taped to the wall, written in the same handwriting as the paper with the necklace. "I know you're in there. When you call me, I'll come back." I shut the door in a hurry, feeling more pressured than ever. When my parents got home and saw me shaken, I told them about her visit. We decided that the next day I'd see Ms. Sonia for a stronger intervention. We also considered going to the police station, but my dad suggested we first see if it was truly something spiritual. If nothing improved, we'd file a police report at least to have it on record. On the appointed day, I went to Ms. Sonia's place in the evening. She said we would do a collective prayer with a few other people. She took me to a back room with some chairs arranged in rows and a small altar. There were 3 or 4 others there, each with their own story. The goal was to seek protection and freedom from negative bonds. We spent about 20 minutes in silence as Ms. Sonia prayed softly and filled the room with the smoke of some herb that gave off a strong herbal scent. Afterward, she tended to each person individually, including me. Miss Sonia took me to a smaller room and asked me to kneel before a bench, extending my hands. She prayed, then said I needed to break this link once and for all. She asked me to repeat phrases of disconnection, renouncing any power or influence Ivana might hold over me. She whispered, "If you stay strong and leave no opening, this person will back off." I agreed, willing to do whatever was necessary. She gave me a new talisman, similar to the first one but slightly bigger, and instructed me to carry it every day. She also told me to keep a cup of water by my bed at night and change it every morning. I went home late, but determined to follow her instructions. My nights began to improve gradually. I still had odd dreams, but they weren't as frightening. At work, I started regaining some focus. I told Sergio in vague terms that I was going through some personal issues. He didn't seem very interested, just telling me to relax. After about 15 days of relative peace, I got an anonymous call at the office. I recognized Ivana's voice. She asked me outright why I was avoiding her. I tried to remain calm. "Because this has gone too far. I need you to understand I don't want any more contact." She let out something like a short laugh and hung up. That day was tense. I worked feeling nervous, and when I got home, my mom saw my expression and guessed something had happened. We had dinner, and I went straight to my room. For a few more days, nothing new happened. On one hand, it reassured me. On the other, I feared Ivana was planning another surprise. Then, one late afternoon, I was leaving my office building and saw her leaning against a tree across the street. She didn't smile or walk toward me, she just watched. I trembled inside but crossed the street, trying to appear steady. "Please don't do this to me." She shrugged and looked at me with a face that said she didn't care. The atmosphere felt heavy, so I walked away. When I glanced back, she had disappeared into the crowd on the sidewalk. I reached home shaken. My mom noticed how pale I was. I told her what happened. She insisted I call Ms. Sonia. I did so immediately. Ms. Sonia advised me to strengthen my prayers, avoid talking to Ivana, and not maintain prolonged eye contact, because according to her, that made it easier to reconnect. My mind flooded with doubts, but I had few options left. A few days later, something happened that truly terrified me. I opened my mailbox in the early morning before heading to work and found a paper with strange symbols drawn on it, plus a tuft of hair that wasn't mine. I felt an immediate revulsion. I put it in a bag and took it straight to Ms. Sonia before going to the office. She examined it and said it was clearly some sort of binding spell. and that Ivana probably wouldn't accept losing control. We went through another round of prayers, and she burned the material in a metal container, throwing salt afterward. She repeated that I had to be strong and not give in to fear or anger. When I got to work that day, I felt like a zombie, utterly drained. I had to find a way to get through this. I decided to take some time off so I wouldn't snap. I spoke to my boss, who granted me a week off. I traveled once again to stay with my cousin Leonard without telling almost anyone and avoiding social media. I spent a few days reading, chatting with him, and trying to forget. It was comforting. I didn't have such intense nightmares or receive any strange calls. We even discussed trivial matters, and he took me to new places to distract me. When I returned, my mom said Ivana hadn't shown up around our building during those days. Even so, I stuck to my routine of prayers and kept the talisman Miss Sonia had given me. The weeks passed, and each day felt more peaceful. I started sleeping better and eating well, and I even laughed wholeheartedly at jokes my dad made. About 5 months after that first meeting at the coffee shop, I concluded that maybe Ivana's spell or influence was finally breaking. I no longer felt that constant exhaustion. My dreams were free of that tense atmosphere. I spoke a few more times with Miss Sonia, and she told me not to let my guard down, but that she believed in a gradual release. She advised me to keep the same protective ritual for at least 40 days, lighting a small candle and changing the water by my bed. I followed her instructions diligently. Each week things felt more normal. I didn't see Ivana on the street anymore, and I got no notes, calls, or weird objects. My dad, who once doubted all of this, was glad I was back to being myself. My mom hugged me constantly, saying she had never been so worried. Even Sergio at work mentioned I looked more alive. Several more months have passed since then, and Ivana has never reappeared. I'm not sure if she just grew tired or if Ms. Sonia's work truly had its effect. I'd rather not know. I still keep the amulet in my bedside drawer, more as a precaution than out of fear. I learned not to underestimate how people can sneak into our lives and invade our personal space in ways we can't fully explain. I never did figure out exactly how Ivana learned my schedules, preferences, and even my address. Maybe I really did tell her without noticing, as she always claimed. Or maybe it was all part of a plan only she could understand. Even though it's been a while, I haven't stopped wondering, was there truly something supernatural going on? Sometimes I think it might have been mere obsession from someone who knew how to play on my vulnerabilities. Other times, I feel there was something deeper and more subtle at work, a strange energy that absorbed me and kept me from thinking on my own. Either way, I followed Miss Sonia's guidance, sought protection, cut ties, and never allowed her close again. Ever since, I've lived in peace. And that peace, though fragile, makes me believe it's all behind me now. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.